I want to talk to you today about something that many of you have written about or have written in the comments about. You've said something similar like, Lorna, I have this story I want to write, and I can see it. I can imagine it. But every time I sit down to write the story, I practically freeze. If that's you, I want to know you're not broken and you're not behind and you're certainly not alone. And if you believe that you're not a real writer, that's not true. There's a very simple reason why you have these feelings, these thoughts, and once you see it, it really does lose a little bit of its power over you. In case we haven't met, I'm Lorna Faith, and I write clean adventure fiction, and I also write contemporary sweet romance with my pen name Melody Archer. I love to help beginning writers by talking about what I've learned about writing fiction in hopes that something that I've learned will in some small way help you to write and self-publish sweet romance books. As always, what I share is simply how writing my novels has worked for me, but you might have a different way that works better for you. And if you do, that's wonderful. I hope you keep doing what's working. So let's dive a little deeper into this topic about being afraid to begin to write. Go ahead, grab your tea, get comfortable, and let's talk about it, and let's get to what we can do instead. So tip number 1, where does this fear come from? Let's start at the beginning. Literally, let's go back to all the way to your childhood. Think back to your elementary school days. Do you remember the first time you wrote a story or a small little essay and handed it in to the teacher? Maybe it was 2 or 3 sentences long, and perhaps you even drew a picture to go with it because words seemed easier to write when you had a picture to rely on. And then your story came back to you with red marks all over it. The spelling was corrected, the grammar was circled, maybe a comment like "good effort," which even as a child you understood was not really a compliment. We were all taught at an early age that writing is something we need to get right, that there's a correct way to do it and an incorrect way. And someone with a red pen was going to let us know which one we did. I can totally relate to that. I was fearful when I first started writing 15 years ago. I kept telling my husband I wanted to write fiction someday. And he asked me, why wait? Why not do it now? And I told him, because I'm not good enough. I mean, I'm not a real writer. And he reminded me that writing is something that you learn. It's a skill you learn. It's not much different from playing the piano, he said. And he reminded me, you've been playing the piano since you were 5 years old. So writing is a similar thing. Writing takes practice, just like anything else. So he encouraged me to try. And as he encouraged me, I realized I was letting fear hold me back. And I believe fear of not being good enough as a writer, in part, came from elementary school years, but I also believe it partly came from others that I looked up to in my life who discouraged my creativity. So, therefore, the voice in my head of "you're not good enough" buried itself in my subconscious, and I carried it forward as if it were fact. So then, of course, all these years later, as an adult, it was still there. So when I tried to write my 2 historical romance books under my author name Lorna Faith, writing was still a struggle. And that fear of getting it right and the worry that I had meant I couldn't really give myself permission to write freely. It wasn't until I wrote my first billionaire sweet romance, which was a fairy tale retelling, that I allowed myself to write a story that was pure fun and joy. And guess what? My writing shifted from cautious and careful to joyful and free. And so I want to share a little bit of my writing story with you. Maybe you can relate to the feeling of being judged when you sit down to write, that somehow you feel unworthy or not quite good enough as a writer. Perhaps when you sit down to write your sweet romance, your hero and your heroine, that little spark of chemistry that you've been imagining in your head, there's some small quiet part of you that braces for that red pen, or at least the feeling of it. Even though no one is grading you and no teacher is standing over your shoulder, that fear still comes back. But that fear is not really about your talent. It's just an old habit. It's an old worn in groove in your mind that says any words you put down on the page will be judged. And here's what I want to really encourage you with today. That groove that was formed when you were 7 or 9 or 11 years old, it's that fear. Doesn't know that it was in the past. It doesn't, it just knows that there's a similar pattern whenever you sit down to write. So when you feel that hesitation before you start to write in a notebook or type on your laptop, that's not proof that you can't write. It's just an old past echo, a feeling that's maybe haunts you still today. But once you can name it as just a past echo, it gets so much easier to write your story. So if any of that resonates with you today, or maybe you have been sitting on a sweet romance idea waiting until you feel ready or good enough, I want you to take this as a sign that you don't need permission from anyone else. You already have everything you need to begin to write your story. And if you'd like a little encouragement and support, a simple step-by-step path to plot your first sweet romance, so you're not staring at a blank page wondering where to start, I'd love to show you what's inside my Sweet Romance mini course. Write with me, write your first sweet romance. I built it exactly for this moment you're in right now, and you'll find the link below this video. Let's move on to tip number 2. Writing as anticipation, not obligation. Now, here's where I want to turn perhaps your idea of writing upside down. What if writing wasn't about getting it right? What if writing was actually about savoring something? I want you to think about your imagination for a moment. Right now, somewhere in your mind, you have a hero, and maybe he's standing in the doorway. Maybe your heroine just looked up and their eyes met your hero's eyes for the very first time, and there's that flutter. You know the one. And that image already exists inside your head. It's already sounds very delicious in your imagination. Maybe you're enjoying it right now, even as you think about it. Writing is simply the act of taking that image that you have in your imagination and that feeling and setting it down on the blank page so that someone else can have that same feeling too. I love to think of it like this. Imagine you're holding a bow and arrow, and right there, at the tip of the arrow, you've attached the exact picture in your mind, the doorway, the rain, the eyes meeting. And when you write that sentence that captures what you have in your imagination, when the words seem to land just right, it's like releasing that arrow and watching it hit the bullseye. That feeling, that little thrill when a sentence does exactly what you want it to do, that's not a bonus, that is the writing process. And your brain genuinely enjoys to do this. It is wired to enjoy creating story. We've told stories around campfires for as long as we've been human. So this isn't really a skill that you're missing. It's really a delight and a joy that you are allowed to have. So instead of sitting down and asking, how do I write this correctly? Instead, I encourage you to try asking, what do I get to enjoy right now in this moment as I write? What does my heroine see when she walks into that room? What does my hero's voice sound like when he says her name for the first time? So remind yourself, you're not laboring over a page. You're savoring what's in your imagination and simply letting it spill over onto the paper. Tip number 3, you don't have to make this hard. I think, and I say this with so much love, we're making writing far more complicated than it needs to be. I'm talking to myself more than anyone else. So many beginning writers tell me, I don't think I have any talent for this. Or somebody once told me that I wasn't a good enough writer, and I believed them. So I really want to ask you something. Who told you that? Was it a teacher that was having a hard day? Or perhaps a relative who didn't understand creative writing? Or perhaps it was a stranger on the internet who's never written a story themselves. Whoever it was, they are not the final word on your creativity. They are only one voice and one moment in time. And I want to gently encourage you. You've carried that around far too long, and I speak from experience because I carried it around far too long. So here's the truth. You already have a story inside of you. You don't have to invent it from nothing, and you don't have to force it. You simply need to get quiet enough to listen to what your imagination is trying to tell you. So I encourage you, close your eyes for a second, sometime today, and ask yourself, what do I see? Not what should I write, not what will sell, just simply what do I see in my imagination? Maybe you see a small town bakery. Maybe you see a grumpy teacher. Maybe you see a second chance romance at a class reunion. Whatever it is, just let it sit there for a minute and then start to just write down what you see. That's your starting point. Writing at its heart is not invention, it's translation. You're simply translating what's already bubbling up in your imagination and you're putting it onto the blank page in your own words, in your own voice. That's all it's ever been. So if you've been telling yourself, I can't write, I would like to gently challenge you today, and I've had to say this to myself over and over. I'd like to encourage you to replace that thought with something that's a little more true by saying, I haven't yet given myself permission to just see what's in my imagination and write that down, but I will. I will do that starting today. Tip number 4, perfectionism is the real writer's block. Let's talk about the biggest obstacle of all, the one I see that trips up almost every beginning romance writer, myself included, when I first started years ago. Somehow we believe deep down that our first words need to be good. And not just good, but right or perfect. And so even before we've written a single word, we've already edited it in our own heads. And we delete that sentence before we even finish typing it. I know this is true because I did that with my first book, constantly rewriting that first chapter. I don't even know, like at least 10, 15 times. That's what I did. And I remember this so clearly from when I started. I believed that almost everything I put on the page was going to be bad. And looking back, I really think that belief came from the very same place we talked about earlier, that somewhere at some point, somebody made me feel that my writing just wasn't good enough. And I've carried that for years into every single blank page that I've written. But here's what I've learned, and really what I want you to hear today. Perfectionism is really high up there in the list of obstacles that cause us to stop writing. It's not lack of talent, and it's not lack of ideas. It's perfectionism, or you could say fear of writing badly. We want to write that perfect sentence the very first time we write it, and that's simply not how it works. Not for me, and not for any other author you admire, not for anyone. Writing is a skill that is built through practice the same way you'd build any other skill. The first time you ever cooked a meal, it probably wasn't restaurant quality. The first time you rode a bike, you probably wobbled a little on your bike. And we accept that with almost everything else in life, except for writing, for some reason. We expect ourselves to be perfect or have a masterful way of writing at the very first attempt. So here's what I want to encourage you to do. Write your first draft and write it boldly. Let it be a little bit messy. Let it be okay to have typos and clunky sentences and dialogue that maybe doesn't quite work. Let yourself scribble down the story quickly, almost recklessly, just to get it out of your head and onto the paper. Have fun while you do it. have a joyful time writing. The beautiful thing of writing, it's not written in stone, right? We can always shape them later. We can always polish it later. The first draft of your story, the only job it has is to simply exist. That's it. It doesn't have to be good. It just has to be sitting there on the blank page. So you can take that first revision pass and start to build on it from there. So if this is your very first sweet romance that you're writing, I'm very happy for you, and I really mean that. There's really something so special about writing your first story. And I honestly don't want you to spend it gripped with fear. I want you to spend it the way you'd spend a really good day daydreaming, with joy, with curiosity, and with the little thrill of the arrow hitting the target again and again as you write every word, every sentence, every page. So if any of this resonated with you today, if you've been sitting on a sweet romance idea and waiting to feel ready or waiting to feel good enough, I just want to gently encourage you to take this as a sign today. You really don't need permission from anyone else. You already have everything you need to begin writing your story. And if you'd like a little extra support, a clear step-by-step path to plot that very first sweet romance so that you're not staring at a blank page wondering where to start, I'd love to show you what's inside my mini course, Write With Me, Write Your First Sweet Romance. I built it for exactly the moment that you're in right now, and you'll find the link right below this video. But however you choose to begin your story, with you and the blank page and that image in your imagination, I really do encourage you to just begin. Even start writing a simple paragraph today. Begin to write that first romance story and just write it with joy. Let your first draft be brave, a little messy, and filled with so much love and joy. I hope this helped you today. I'd love it if you'd comment below what you are writing about, what your story is about, and I'd love to read it. I'd love to hear about it. Meanwhile, have fun writing your sweet romance, and I'll see you in the next video.